hopefully we're not going to get into faith.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Phil.
Hi.
Hey.
Well, not necessarily faith, but I just wanted to call in because I'm a pastor's son.
Mm-hmm.
My dad is actually the pastor of the First Church of God in West Elton, Missouri.
Oh, wow.
And I've been kind of a struggling believer after watching your show. And I just wanted to share possible answered prayer with you to get your take on it.
Yeah, because it says here in the notes that you think God's real because he answered your prayers. So we would love to hear what prayers were answered and how you know it was God.
Well, I was going through a period of struggling with my faith, so I actually quit going to church for a while, and I still don't go to church now, but this was early 2017, and my grandma had to go to the doctor, and she had low blood sugar, so the doctor said she couldn't drive anymore, and so she asked me to take her to church. So I pretty much said, okay, I'll take you to church, but I don't want to have to go there because to me, going to church once is enough to find out what it's like. And as a pastor's kid, I've already been there for hundreds and hundreds of times. I've heard the sermons, I've heard the songs, I read the whole Bible. And so I said, I'll take you over there, Grandma, but I'll just pick you up afterwards. So I did. And then I decided to go eat at McDonald's for breakfast. And so I was sitting out in the car, and I decided to turn on the radio. And it was kind of cold that day, and the car just totally ran out of battery power, and it died. So I thought, oh, great, I forgot my cell phone, so I can't call anybody. And all the automotive shops are closed around me. Mm-hmm. The Target nearby, this was on, I forgot to say, this was on Lindbergh Boulevard in North St. Louis.
Yeah, I used to live near there.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
That's neat.
It's not a sign from God. I've lived lots of places.
Cool story, bro.
So anyway, I was sitting out in the parking lot, and I decided maybe the sun will warm up the battery enough so the car will start. So I open the hood, and I wait there for maybe half an hour, and I try to start the car, and it still doesn't work. So then I'm really stuck, and I don't know how I'm going to get back home at this point. So
and pick up your grandma.
Right.
Yeah, but I had to pick her up, too, from church. But all of a sudden, a car pulls up next to mine, and a man gets out of the car, and I just would like to say that I'd say 95% of the time in St. Louis, if somebody talks to me, it's always to ask me for something, like ask me for money or ask me for a ride. So this, I didn't know what to expect. But the man got out of the car, and he asked me if something was wrong with the car. And I said, yeah, my battery died. I'm kind of stuck here. And so he gets these jumper cables out of his car, and he helps me to restart my car. But then what he said before he left always stuck with me, because I said, I wish I had something to give you, but I have nothing to give except my thanks. And he said, there's no need to thank me. This is your blessing from God. And the reason that stuck with me so much was because earlier that week, I had prayed that God would show me some sort of sign or evidence or proof that I was praying to the real God. And so I couldn't dismiss that as an answer to prayer. And so though I struggle with my faith, it's just things like this that kind of reinforce my beliefs that I've grown up with. And I guess I'd just like to see what your take is on it. Like, how would you have looked at this situation back when you still were a Christian compared to now?
Like, on that side, like, I can see, especially when I was more, I mean, by the time I got out of my religion, I didn't have a car while I was in that time. So I'm not sure exactly, but I can see myself kind of justifying in my mind that this was, divine intervention. But now looking and seeing the works that people can do for one another and the way that we empathize with others, the way that we can come to the assistance of another and be a community. What I see from that type of act there, especially if you're there stranded, you have your car hood open, stuff like that, it signals to someone else that it was in a position that they were able to help, to actually stop and say, hey, do you need help? And so I look at that as just an awesome human being compassionate and seeing someone else that may be in need and actually taking time and lending that assistance. But it has nothing to do necessarily with their belief in a deity or your belief in one, because I can see that type of empathy and that type of compassion happening all around us here in this building, here at our volunteer events. That's something that's not necessarily unique.
Not only not unique, there's absolutely nothing remarkable about this scenario at all. It was cold. Your hood was up. Of course, some nice person might stop to see if you needed some assistance.
Sure.
I've done it as both a believer and as a non-believer. At the end, when he says you don't have to give him anything, that's what almost any decent person who's willing to stop is going to say, because they didn't stop in the hopes that you'd have $20 for them.
Right.
They saw somebody out there in need and they were being a decent person. The fact that he calls it your blessing from God just tells you that he's a believer. If it had been me that had stopped and got your car started for you, and you said, I wish I had something to give you, I would have said something like, you don't need to give me anything. I just want to make sure that you get out of here safely.
Yeah, have a safe trip home.
At the end of the day, though, let's assume that this was incredibly rare. Like, let's say we lived in in a movie like Escape from New York, where nobody's going to stop and help anybody. And you're stuck, and somebody helps you, and at the end of it, they tell you that this is your blessing from God, and you had been praying for a blessing from God. Does that mean it was actually a blessing from God? Or did you just run into one of the majority of, in this world, the majority of people believe in a God. The majority of people are likely, even those who aren't particularly religious, will use language like that because it's cultural to do so. Phil and I were at a burger joint yesterday, and a woman who's clearly an atheist, mm-hmm. in a not completely sarcastic sense, basically shook Phil's hand and said, well, God bless you for doing the stuff, because that's the language that's ingrained in us. So it may be that the person believed in God. It's maybe that they didn't. Maybe they probably did, given the odds. But I don't see how you can say, okay, I was desperate for a sign from God, and what he gave me was something that happens every day, that is wholly unremarkable, and I'm just going to conclude that that's God giving me a sign. What kind of God, by the way, has you in a bad place asking for a sign and then decides, in a week or so, I'll stall his car and have somebody help him out? Because at a minimum, if we're going to talk about a God, a wise God, somebody that understands reason, that God would have to know that there's not sufficient evidence to warrant a connection between I said a prayer and this happened to show that God was real. So if God wants to demonstrate that he's actually real, he would have to do so in a way that goes beyond, hey, this is an incredibly probable set of circumstances. It's like the people who pray to find their keys, and then they search the whole house and they find their keys and they give credit to God. Well, if you hadn't prayed to God and you search the whole house, you're still going to find your keys. Mm-hmm. And you always find it in the last place you look, because that's when you stop looking. All of this is wholly unremarkable. Now, you asked how I would view this when I was still a believer. And so the answer is, I probably would have reached the same conclusion you did at some point.
Yeah.
But since then, I've gotten to understand that conclusion isn't justified. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe there is a God, and this God conspired to have your car break down just so that he could send somebody to do something nice for you. I don't know I can't show that didn't happen. But the problem is, nobody can show that that's what did happen. And given that situation, it's unreasonable to conclude that that's the best explanation, or even the correct one.
And even if it did happen, hopefully it would happen outside of somewhere better than a Mickey D's, of all places to place it. But,
I mean, God does a really seemingly does a great job of helping people find their car keys or making sure that somebody gets a jump start in the car, and yet, doesn't heal amputees or kids with cancer.
Yeah, I guess my only response to that would be when you were talking about how rare it would be for something to happen, because for him to say, "This is your blessing from God," that was the only time in my life I remember someone saying that to me.
Oh, come on now.
But
you're a preacher's kid, and nobody else had ever said, "This is your blessing from God," in your entire life.
Or have a blessed day, or some type of, usual phrase that you get from people. Or what is it? Some people in my family say, I'm passing on the blessings.
Yeah,
just passing on the blessings.
Now, I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just, I just think you're kind of perhaps overemphasizing this. But you get to decide how you're going to, treat all this. I just find it strange that nobody had ever said anything like that to you after having done something nice. Had nobody ever done anything nice to you before?
Well, they have, but they didn't state it exactly like he said, like, "This is your specific blessing from God," almost like it was a response to the prayer earlier that week.
Okay.
Or is it more possible that you were really looking for a response, and you looked at this situation and really grafted it on as a response to the prayer that you did? If you hadn't made that prayer and the same type of thing occurred where your car broke down and he said that, would you have attributed the same significance as what you're doing now?
Probably not.
Well, here's a question. If you had jumper cables in your car and you had stopped to help somebody, and at the end they had said, "Hey, wish I had something to give you, but I don't," what would you have said?
I probably just would have said, "Oh, you're welcome. You don't have to give me anything."
Okay.
But these things happen to me, like, I just wonder how unlikely something would have to be before you would think there was more to the story, just like...
The likelihood is irrelevant. The likelihood is irrelevant. There has to be a demonstrated connection. So let's say I win the lottery 2 weeks in a row after praying because I'm financially destitute, and I win the lottery, and that's $400 and some odd million, and then I take another dollar out of that and I put it in and I win the next week too. That's incredibly unlikely. And yet that does not mean that it was an answer to prayer. You have to actually demonstrate that it is, because in order to figure out a causal connection between an event and what may have been responsible for it, you have to put together a list of candidate explanations of things that are likely to be the case. And you also have to probably leave a question mark because there may be other explanations that you don't know about. And then you have to have a way to assess, of those candidate explanations, which ones are more probable than another. In the case of a God, we have no way to assess whether or not it's possible or probable or how probable it is. So it ends up effectively being a zero. That doesn't mean that God didn't do it. It just means that we cannot assess the likelihood. And so by definition, every other natural explanation, no matter how unlikely, is, for all intents and purposes, more probable than a supernatural one, because we have no way to demonstrate that. So if I flip a coin and it comes up heads 35 times in a row, well, was that just luck? Because we know that that's possible, that it can happen. Was it a God trying to give me a message? Why can't God do a better job of giving a message that can't be looked at as, this is incredibly improbable, but not necessarily supernatural? This is how we assess this. Now, that doesn't mean that you are in a position where you should just dismiss the supernatural. The point is, you cannot use the supernatural as an explanation until such time as we have reason to believe that the supernatural is possible, probable, and likely. And you have to have some way of kind of quantifying that.
Okay. Just the other thing I want to speak on is, you said in the past that you don't give significance to number combinations. And like you were saying about unlikely events, for example, once I went to the gas station and my odometer read 111.1 miles. And I noticed this, and when I went to the gas station, I saw someone in there I hadn't seen in 15 years. So would you just say...
Why wouldn't your odometer read 1515 then?
People give significance to the number 1111. I don't know what it is about that number.
But how many times does that number appear on someone's odometer and nothing of significance actually occurs afterwards? Like fairly a lot, I would say.
I think part of it is that my attention was drawn to it. Like if it was some other number, I may not have even looked at it.
Sure.
Okay.
So you see somebody that you haven't seen in 15 years and your odometer reads 37982 and you don't pay any attention. You see somebody you haven't seen in 15 years and your odometer reads 111.1 and you're like, wow, that's interesting. That's weird. But as Phil was pointing out, how many times are car odometers going to read 111.1 and nothing significant happens?
I don't know. That's just the thing.
Almost every time.
Yeah.
Almost every time.
Millions of cars out there.
And the alternative is how often has something significant happen and there's a number on your odometer that you wouldn't have attributed any significance to. And by the way, this is, I kid you not, the very first time in my life anyone has ever said that 111.1 has any sort of significance.
Well, 1111 is what a lot of people give significance to. But I was just...
Literally, I've never heard anybody suggest that 1111 has significance.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
I might have missed out. Huh. But even if everybody were running around saying 1111 is significant, that doesn't make it so.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to hear your opinion on it. But thanks for talking to me.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate it. We're gonna wrap up. If you're still on the line, though, we're gonna take some after show calls. But and I appreciate those people waiting. So Jerome, Q, and Marcos, we're gonna get to you right as soon as